the Atman, which is the ultimate self, exists in everything, including animals, including the teeniest insect, including plants.
And so how do you interact with that?
You don't necessarily have to, you know, there are forms of life that you cannot communicate with, but they are there.
And so
they are manifestations of the same one. The same, see, the basic cosmology is, there is no ex nihilo creation, that where the creator is separate from the created and makes it out of nothing. So since the starting presumption is that the one is without a second, there is no other, so there is no dualism with the Antichrist kind of concept, and there is no dualism between God and Word.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So, if there can't be any other, because wherever there is another, then the logic comes in to argue that something or other is faith.
Yes.
So, if there is no other, then what is the world? What is the raw material made of?
And also, where do I end and you begin in a sense?
So, but first the world. Yeah. So the answer to that is that the world is God's own manifestation of Himself is a word. But it's like if you have a infinitesimal part of something. The infinitesimal part, when you take out an infinitesimal part, what is left is still unchanged.
Interesting. So it's almost a mathematical concept.
Yes.
Like the limit.
So that is correct. So if you take a number, you know, x, and you subtract delta out of it, you still have x. It has infinitesimal by definition is so trivial in comparison that it leaves the entity unchanged. So you have the unchanged God, that is the transcendent God. And an infinitesimal part has become everything. Now this is very interesting. So this means that it is transcendent and also immanent. Everything is God, and yet God is unchanged.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It is. So it is not pantheism, because pantheism doesn't have a transcendent God. And it's not monotheism, because monotheism has only a transcendent God.
It is also premised on the idea of creation.
Creation.
Not, in a sense, there's a fundamental tension between the eternal God and a God that can create.
Right.
Because if a God is constant and unchanging in properties, and also infinite, it's challenging to have the notion of kind of an emergent creation.
That is correct. So this is a transcendent and immanent one. So the world is therefore sacred, because everything is basically God's form.
So how does that work, though? From the standpoint of a Western person, in my case a Jewish person, the idea that human beings are sacred is very intrinsic to Judaism. But the idea that we are also almost literally united with God would seem overwhelming. It would seem...
It would. So here's an idea. So here's the thing. Suppose Joshua is acting in a play. And in that play you have to perform the role of, you know, Mr. X. So it's Joshua performing X.
Yes.
Right? Now, when you are performing X, are you X or are you Joshua?
Oh, interesting. So where does your identity end when you're playing a specific role?
Right. So I would say, let's say you write it as Joshua hyphen as hyphen X. So the character on the stage is Joshua as X. Correct? Joshua as performing X. You cannot say that this is X, because that would mean that X is real by itself. It's really Joshua as X. It's not X.
It's a hybrid form.
It's a manifestation of Joshua transformed as X for role playing and a temporary role. Because after you are done, you go home and you're Joshua again.
And so that's metaphorical for human beings.
God as man.
Well, then what's the purpose of human life?
But first let's look at it.
Yeah.
If it's Joshua as X,
yes,
right? Then when enacting X, the X does not know I'm Joshua. He's forgotten. The X doesn't know that he's Joshua.
Oh, interesting. You become so immersed.
You become so immersed. You're so engrossed. You're so into the role that you think you are X, and you are crying when X is supposed to cry. You're laughing when X is supposed to laugh, and you really have forgotten that this is actually a role I'm playing, but it is not really who I am. Yeah.
That is such an interesting.
That is an amazing, huge difference in perspective. So the liberation of the individual is when X begins to realize that I am Joshua as X. That's called liberation.
Oh, interesting.
And that, so he can keep playing the role of X, but he now plays it with a different attitude. He plays a different attitude because he doesn't see himself limited as X. The limits of X are just, so he goes through sorrow, but that is X's sorrow. He goes through enjoyment, that is X's enjoyment. He knows that birth of X, when he came there in the morning and dressed up as X to play the role on the stage, was not really his birth, it was just a form he created. And the death of X, when the director says the game's over, we don't need X anymore, his role is over, it's not that I'm over. That particular role is over. So this way, Joshua as X can then later on become Joshua as Y. He play another role, somebody else's role, right?
And so there's, well, the interesting idea in the hyphenated form, there's a certain set of properties or principles to Joshua,
right,
which can be manifested differently in the different roles that Joshua plays.
Exactly. Now, there's another interesting thing. Suppose there is this play with a husband and wife who are arguing and having fun, or two partners or two players. And suppose Joshua enacts both of them. The same Joshua is simultaneously performing multiple roles. Now there are movies which have been done like that. Yeah? And there are some theater that has been done like that, where the same actor comes and performs and then goes away, quickly changes some clothes and does something else. A lot of, and there's a style of theater in India where the guy, this profile, left profile is one character, the right profile is a different character. So when he's looking at the stage with one side, he's performing a role, then he suddenly switches very quickly and answers back. So he's having a dialogue between two characters performed by the same actor. One's a man, one's a woman, for example. One's a demon, one's a nice deity. So they're having a conversation. This is performed a lot. To make the point that multiple roles are being performed by the same actor.
So it's sort of, in a postmodern sense, it's the idea that we have multiple identities, multiple facets to our identities.
Yes.
And they can be made manifest at different points and in different ways.
Yes.
And also I'm thinking, Amartya Sen talked a lot about it in terms of almost notions that we have spherical nodules of identity. And they come in such different forms. And so at different points, it's as though different spherical nodules are intersecting and interacting with those nodules of other people.
Right.
So that would be kind of, in a multiple sense, you can at once be Joshua as X, and Joshua as Y, and Joshua as Z.
And Joshua and X may be having a fight with Joshua as Y, but they're both Joshua.
Oh, so you can even have the internal tension.
Yes. So basically, once you get this simple idea or this complex idea of God performing Rajdeep, and God as Joshua, and God as Kent, and God as Cleo, then you can expand it and say God as every single creature, from the tiniest insect, bird, dog, every being in the cosmos.
Well, why does it have to be a creature? Why can it not be God as a tree, or God as
a stone, God as an electron? So when we started the conversation, I said God becomes the cosmos, and that is literally what it is. So God is every single particle, and therefore in the Big Bang it is God who is manifesting through the Big Bang part of himself into space, matter, time. And therefore there is no conflict between creation and evolution in the Hindu system, because this whole evolution, scientific evolution, is a outgrowth of God being involuted in the space-time matter matrix. So since it is God as every electron, and God as every proton, and God as every combination, every molecule, every bird, every tree, so therefore God is immanent in every aspect of existence, making all the cosmos and all the nature sacred, for one thing, because it's God. God's one. This is what God's one.
Here's a question now.
Sure.
You're using a term that, at least in my mind, has very Western connotations of God. What does that mean from
Brahman? The Hindu term is Brahman. Brahman is B-R-A-H-M-A-N. Brahman is the one that is all reality, all existence, everything. There is nothing outside of Brahman that exists. So there is no separate soul. It is Brahman as Joshua, that we may think of as Joshua's soul, but actually is Brahman performing Joshua. And it is Brahman who, as the tree is the tree, and Brahman is the volcano, and Brahman is the clouds. There is no, not only is there no cosmos separable from Brahman, and there not only is there no soul separable from Brahman, but there is no anti-Brahman. So there is no evil person outside. There's no separate evil person.
Just one unit of
yes,
and
within this are all the things we consider good and all the things we consider bad.
So how does that work though? Why would there necessarily in this universe, why the existence of evil? It's not necessarily a problem of evil per se, but why does evil exist?
Okay, so now you need to introduce another idea of karma. So the individual, what you would call soul, what the Hindus would call Atman, which is the ultimate essence of the self, is not a separate thing from Brahman, but is Brahman playing all these different roles. Now in the roles, Joshua as X, playing that theater role, has gotten himself into trouble. Not Joshua, but the X role got himself into trouble, as part of the role being played. Right? So he's in trouble, and he's facing some consequences. Joshua as Y, which is another role also going on, did some great things and got a big reward out of it. He's having a good time. So it is Joshua performing X, suffering, and Joshua performing Y, enjoying. But neither of them is coincidental. They are the outcomes of their own actions. That's karma. So karma is the account that a soul, if you will, but we will use a different term, carries from one life to the other, taking forward its deeds in the form of like a bank account. So this is why some people are born with gifting, some people are born handicapped, somebody's born in Bill Gates' house, and somebody's born homeless. So it's not arbitrary, and it is not that there's an unjust God or a God that is randomly handing out things.
So it's equal opportunity from the starting point.
So karma is equal opportunity. It's a system of justice. It's a system of accountability. It's a system which says that nothing happens which is unfair. So when we perceive something which is negative, bad, evil, or we call it that way, actually it's coming to us from our own actions, which may have happened in a prior life.
So it's ultimately a just system. Your starting point is determined by your prior actions.
Correct.
And then where you go from here is also determined by your actions in the present life.
Right. Now an interesting consequence is that my past is not from my father, biological father, but my Rajiv's previous life. So in my previous life, I may have been a Chinese, I may have been a black person, I may have been a white person, I may have been a Muslim, I may have been a Buddhist, Christian, and I may have been a dog, I may have been all these, and I probably have been all of these. So since I have gone through many, many lives and had many roles in those lives, I am actually the sum total of all that experience that I've gathered, good things and bad things. And so I'm born to manifest the cumulative effect of all those karmas I've done. This means I cannot have too much allegiance to a particular bloodline or a particular race. So reincarnation and karma also are an antidote to bloodlines and race.
Because the presumption is that you've been part of all races, all bloodlines.
So a person doesn't have to be too obsessed with the history of this lineage and this ancestry and this ancestry.com. I mean, the point is, to me, my biological ancestry through my father is not really my past history.
Well, here's a question. Again, from the Western standpoint, why belief in reincarnation? Why not the belief that, when you die, that's it. Okay. When you die, you go to heaven. What is the origin of this belief and why is it compelling to you?
Well, the why question is not answered by any religion because it's how question. It's how it works. But why is creation like it is? Why is there a creation at all? Why not have one at all? Or why not have different laws of physics? We don't know. We have to admit we don't know. Because you could construct a universe with different laws of physics. You could simulate, like in science fiction movies to simulate. You could make up an imagined universe and say, well, why I was outsmarting God, I'm giving him a better deal, better universe, why did God choose that? We don't know. That we don't know. So reincarnation is not a why, but a how. It functions this way. And it's a way for individual beings that are really nothing but the one being to express themselves freely and face the consequences of the results of their own choices that they've made. And this the issue I'm highlighting is the effect this has, this belief system has, this reincarnation as a claim, the effect it has on race and bloodlines and ancestry and history. One of the concepts that I have developed is called history centrism. History centrism is an obsession with history and creating a sense of historical identity based on one's ancestry and collective destiny of people, certain people. Then there's a lot of fight because then, you know, I claim from my ancestors that the history was X and we are the privileged people, you claim something else. I claim based on history that you guys, your ancestors did something to us and we have to take revenge on you, or we are the victims, or you claim the opposite. So once we are in bondage to history as our identity of who we really are, we are in an irreconcilable situation because you cannot change that history. Since you cannot change what happened, and I cannot change what happened, we are burdened with that history.
So there's an internal momentum to it,
Yeah.
that we're almost, we fate ourselves in a sense to doing certain things.
Yes.
By virtue of the history and the lessons that we learn from it.
Yes, and the historical conflicts are irreconcilable. So how do you, so this system that Hindus have is not burdened by history because the purpose of the nature of the self is not limited by the trajectory of that lineage of history. So you are Jewish only in this life. You were in your previous life maybe Muslim probably. You might have been a Hindu, you might have been an atheist, you might have been all the different kind of races around. So you might be very proud of all their ancestries because you may have had that experience. And in your next life you're not going to necessarily be born again as a Jew. You could be born in any tradition. So it frees you from the burden of history.
So I'm curious though, you describe in a way reincarnation as just kind of a phenomenon that exists. In addition to your background in Hinduism, in addition to your upbringing, why do you find that vision compelling?
Well, I think there is it's more scientific if you believe there is justice and causation. It is more scientific to say that a kid who is born blind, it's not because of some either injustice or some coincidence. Because one of the questions that I think the Abrahamic religions have not addressed too much is inequalities at birth. And it's not even a question discussed a whole lot. So there aren't even very many theories. It's just left to, I've asked a lot of theologians and they usually digress from the issue. Whereas in Hinduism it says you're accountable for every situation you're born into. You are accountable. Now the issue is, if my dad's DNA makes me a certain way, isn't it the dad who's influencing me? Right? The dad, it looks like it. The Hindu response would be that Rajiv's own karma deserved a certain dad who would give him the features consistent with his karma. So the kid born in Bill Gates' house was, on account of their own karma, going to have a certain life beginning, and therefore there's a match between that soul and Bill Gates, who needed a child. So that soul is born in Bill Gates' house and not some other soul. Whereas another person, because of their karma, the karmic fit, is with a poor homeless person. So I have circumstances that resemble my dad, and it would incorrectly seem like my dad caused my circumstances, but actually I caused my circumstances. And I therefore got this dad. So you can never blame your parents. You can never say that this is my parents' fault that they had that situation for me, because it is your own karma that gave you those parents.
Isn't there a problem that it potentially causes, though, insofar as almost blaming the victim? So, from my standpoint, theologically and whatnot, your birth is out of your control. It's something independent of you. You could call it random. You could call it just something that happens. And as a result, when I see a poor person, I find myself obligated to help them, because it's not as though they brought it upon themselves. It was by chance that they had to, they were in that circumstance.
Yes.
Does this justify almost a social Darwinism or something?
No. Let me address two issues here. Okay. Second issue I'll address is what's the basis for ethics, morality, compassion in this system, which I'll come to. It's a very important issue. And that has to do with I see in you the same Brahman expressing as expressing through me. And therefore is my empathy. And therefore when you are suffering or hurt, I am not helping the Joshua, I'm helping Brahman as Joshua. So Rajiv, Brahman as Rajiv is helping Brahman as Joshua. That's the basis of our connection and our link. But let me come to that in a moment. First thing is, isn't there a sense of kind of fatalism, victimhood, that's what I was born in, that can happen. But that is an incorrect interpretation, an incorrect way of looking at it. It's exactly like if a person is kicked out of a job because they were found drunk at work and they threw him out. Now he could say that, I don't want the system of accountability because that makes me look like a victim. But the point is he has to be accountable. So karma says that it is not coincidental. It is not, your circumstances are the way they are because you caused them. And the original cause may have happened way back in the past that you don't remember, but you did cause them. And the other person, you should never be jealous that why did this guy win the lottery and why is that guy, living in such a great, dynasty of kings or whatever, and I'm a poor soul, because everyone is getting ultimately what they deserve. So it also increases your accountability and if you are informed by this karmic philosophy, you are more concerned and more careful about your choices being made now because you're going to have the consequences there. And even if you're about to die, even if somebody's got a gun on their head and they're going to blow you up, a last minute thought, a last minute compassion, a last minute gesture is not a waste. There is nothing you do which is wasted in this system because everything you do is always going to be there, included.
So how does that work though? Okay, who does the accounting? So it's a just system. It presupposes a just universe wherein all of your actions directly determine where you'll be in your next lifetime. Who makes that determination?
Okay. So this is an interesting point. It's like asking, a similar question would be, who keeps track of the electron, making sure it's moving the correct way?
It just exists.
And this is called rhythm, which means, the word rhythm means patterns of the nature of reality. So it is the nature of existence to, even before you come to physics of inanimate matter, beneath that is rhythm. Rhythm is the nature of reality so deep that these principles are like the deepest laws that govern reality. And the Dharma is actually everything has a Dharma. Electron has a Dharma. Electron doesn't have a religion, so this is one of the differences between Dharma and religion. And Dharma, tree has a Dharma to behave a certain way, grow a certain way. The clouds have a Dharma that they become dense and they have rain. Electron has a Dharma that based on the intensity of the electrical field, it can move a certain way. So inanimate things, not having free will, not having choice, just move by the virtue of their Dharma, and the Dharma of inanimate things is what we call physics. So that's how a Hindu would look at physics. And those that have evolved to a state of consciousness that they can make free choices, their Dharma is now their righteousness, their choice, because their Dharma becomes a matter of their own free will. But even those that don't have free will are mechanical devices moving around, there's no karma for them, they're just doing this because this is the way they're built to do. So everything in the cosmos has a Dharma and has some principles that it's following. So karma is just it's like gravitation, who keeps track of it? It's just the nature of things.
Oh, interesting. And not in an ideal form. What came to mind for me is Dharma the platonic form of the tree or the electron, and karma is the accounting of how well you did based on kind of the dharmic norm set. But it sounds like that's not quite...
No, it is actually existence. Because since Brahman became the word, there is no separate Brahman who is looking down with binoculars and saying, okay, now Rajiv, I'm going to give you so many points for this and that. The accounting system is not separate from the system itself. Just like the electron's property to move a certain way is just built into the electron. It is just a point particle, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating thing. So this means that the one Brahman is everywhere, is as every electron, and therefore, since Brahman is the electron, therefore that manifestation is part of the way the electron behaves.
So it's a big organism that has many component parts in a sense.
And each part is really a reflection of the same one, reflected to seem like separate parts. So the separateness of this electron and that electron is illusory, and the separateness of Joshua from Brahman as being a separate soul is illusory. And so the purpose of evolution of consciousness and the purpose of liberation is for Joshua as X to understand that he's Joshua as X. He's not just X as X. And the human condition, which causes what we call bad things and evil things and problems, is that Rajiv is not aware every moment that it's Brahman as Rajiv. He thinks he's Rajiv, just by Rajiv himself. And he thinks that he's this isolated atomic being. And he goes through life trying to get the best of others, and he goes through life accumulating and avoiding things. And all that karma keeps building up in his account, and it just goes on and on. So his way out of this is a state of consciousness where he begins to have a direct realization that this is Brahman as X. So it's not that I'm going to run away and stop being Rajiv, but I will now be more conscious as I'm being Rajiv. I'll still respect the relationships I have, I'll still respect all the duties I have to perform as Rajiv, mundane as they may be. I still drive my car, and I'll still go pay my taxes, I do all those things. But I'm not going to be limiting my experience as this physical body called Rajiv.
So there's this massive universe. Humans are a very tiny, tiny component of that. Why are we born with the notion of self? Why do we have identities? My understanding is from a very young age, if we're just tiny components of this much larger universe.
So this is a principle of forgetting. So the forgetting that I'm Brahman is the cause of the limited idea of self. The small I, as they say, and the big I. In Hinduism, they use this expression a lot. The capital S self and the small self. They write that many times. Indian philosophers write that a lot. So I am really the big I, capital I, who's become the small I, and have defined my identity, and this identity is preserved because I have desires, because I have attachments. I have defined, so Rajiv, the ego, is the matrix where all kinds of things come together that define who I am. So I've defined myself. If somebody asks a typical person, who are you? Very rarely would a person say, I'm Brahman as Rajiv, and I'm conditioned to think I'm Rajiv, but really I have had an inspiration that tells me otherwise. Most people would say I'm a person who is married to this person, I have that children, I own this entity, this is my name, I was born in that place, and I came from this country, I belong to that religion. They basically define all the roles of X on stage, right? Yeah. So they will define all the roles that X is playing on stage, and they will say that in essence they're defining X rather than Joshua as X. So this is the limited vision or illusion or delusion of the individual self, and undoing that is the deconstruction of meditation and all the spiritual practices in Buddhism, Hinduism. They both, all the Dharma traditions basically are deconstruction of this limited self that one has imagined oneself to be.
What happens when you deconstruct that self?
So the state of liberation is in Buddhism called nirvana, and in Hinduism is called moksha, and is a state of consciousness where you're conscious in a very expansive way, a hugely expansive identity of who you are, but also knowing that I'm fitting into this body for now, and I'm going to move around, and I'm going to fall ill, and I'm going to fall down, and I'm going to be hungry, and all the things that happen to a body are going to happen, but I'm not really bothered or concerned or too traumatized by that, because I know that this will pass, and I'll move on. So that's a state of liberation, and in Hinduism sometimes it's called Jivan Mukti, which means living enlightenment. Means this is not an enlightenment, this is not a liberation in heaven, it's a living enlightenment.
So what happens karmically when you achieve that state of living enlightenment?
So if a person is, this is a very good question, if a person is a living enlightened being, then the only reason they even have this body is because some events of the body are yet to finish, because the karma is not fully depleted. So the body will just drop one day, it will, and the person is no longer going to be born into another body. And so they are one with the divine, they are Brahman. They have a recollection of all the roles they've played, of all the enjoyments, whatever they've done, but they're no longer going to be limited in a body form. So it's liberation from the limits of body. And Hindus would argue that if you were to promise a heaven as a physical, as a separate place from this cosmos, and as a separate body from God's presence and from each other, there's many, many arguments and many, many debates on why this doesn't work. So the philosophers debate with this technique of negative kind of falsifying, proof by contradiction, proving that, you know, if you make a certain assumption, then it doesn't, there's some contradiction. One of the common debating styles that Hindus and Buddhists had when they debated each other for hundreds of years was they both recognized, both Hindus and Buddhists recognized the falsity of the self, Rajiv. They both say that this has to be deconstructed. And so therefore they shared a lot of the meditation techniques also on how to do that. They also refuted that time began. The time has a finite beginning. There's no beginning of time and hence no end of time. Time has been there beginningless. And before the Big Bang was a prior universe, and before that was another universe. So there's an infinite series of universes. There's never been a first universe. There's always been a prior one. And there will be more universes coming. So this idea of infinite time, rather than finite time, is built into the psyche of Dharma tradition.
That it just kind of stretches out.
It just goes on. And so the first question you ask, now we can address it. Why?
Yeah.
Okay. So we as humans cannot understand God's why, because we don't at this point in time have the same consciousness capacity. Like a child cannot understand, necessarily why the parents are doing all these things. But as the best we can be given, the best explanation we can be given is that God is doing why is God creating? Why is God making himself in the universe? Why is God as Joshua, God as Rajdeep going on? Why is all this happening? This is called God's Leela, means divine play. So God, in order to experience himself, is him experiencing himself in all the infinite possible forms that he can have. So it's like you are an artist, you are painting this to enjoy it, you are singing something to enjoy it. So it is God as an artist, creator, performer, is making everything out of himself. Because there does not exist a dualism where something else is also out there. So there's no pre-existing or ex nihilo matter that he could have made things out of. So it's like an artist or a sculptor who doesn't have clay that exists that he can turn into something. So he's making himself into this piece of art. So this is God's art. The whole universe and its existence is a divine play.
Oh, interesting. So in that case, what is our purpose in that? Simply to become a part of that artwork? Or simply
to play the roles we are in a dignified manner, and evolve to a point where we are not limited by these roles, where we are not obsessed by all the cravings and all the desires and all the fears. We don't have to worry about those. And to raise our consciousness where we can actually embody this broader, bigger consciousness and live and become living enlightened beings. So that would be the Hindu equivalent of heaven and earth, is a society of enlightened beings.
You talk a great deal and with a great deal of passion about the Dharma traditions. And I'm curious, almost in zooming out, what motivates you to do that? What gets you so excited to tell people, especially it would seem in the West, about Dharma?
Well, it's actually my journey ultimately for my own enlightenment, for my own self, for my own benefit. And sharing becomes very natural because we live in a society where people need to understand each other's traditions better. But the primary goal of self-inquiry and discovery is to understand it for myself, to be a better person, and to live in accordance with the Dharma. So I've lived as born and raised as a Hindu, but I've lived in a very westernized setting. I have a very westernized education, westernized careers and business I've had. And this is my home, and my kids are born and raised in this country, so I'm an American. But I feel that there is a difference in the Dharma from the Abrahamic religions. And this difference enriches the American tapestry. It enriches it by bringing new ideas, new possibilities, and we need to learn from each other. So by dissolving myself, if I were to dissolve myself and just become like another American and deny my distinctiveness, I would not be helping make a contribution to this society. There are many problems with difference, because the difference can also create tensions and separations, but it is not necessarily the case. You can enjoy difference, you can celebrate difference, you can say diversity is a form of difference, like there's differences in cuisine, in music, in fashions, in poetry, and they don't create problems, they are celebrated. So we can have differences in human cultures and in perspectives of the divine, ideas of the nature of God and the nature of self, that, you know, we have different approaches and we've had different experiences in our traditions. So I feel that difference is something, one of the signature elements, I would say, of my thinking is to emphasize difference as a very important thing to understand, to preserve and protect, and to do it with mutual respect.
So it sounds like it's one of your goals is to enable Americans, enable people in the West to understand this element of difference. And there's a large and growing Hindu community in the US. What would you like from them? What are you hoping for the broader Hindu community?
Well, I think the Hindu community is a bit confused and lost, because they have many misconceptions about being American. I addressed a lot of Hindu communities groups all over. I was at a student camp yesterday in Pennsylvania where they brought Hindu student leaders from various universities, and we had a workshop. So I meet with a lot of different kinds of community people. Hindus have the false impression that to be properly Americanized, fully Americanized, you somehow have to shed this baggage of your past. And that's not really true. Because in America you can be an Irish American, Italian American, Jewish American, Hispanic American, African American, and that doesn't make you less American. So you could be a Hindu American, and there's no reason to be afraid of it or to be embarrassed of it. This is what I tell people. The second problem is that the generation that came as immigrants, my generation, have been too busy making money, becoming successful, getting established, which is typically what immigrants do. So they haven't spent a whole lot of time raising their kids to understand their own tradition. So they're working so hard that the kids are sort of, they understand Hinduism through the stereotypes that they see in books and media. What I've called the caste, cows and curry stereotype. I coined that term, caste, cows and curry. That sort of nice, exotic stuff.
So through a very American lens, actually.
Yes.
They learn just like any other Americans about Hinduism.
Yes.
And then I guess that proves difficult then to internalize the concept.
Yes, and I think that a lot of Hindu preachers, it's not just the layperson you could excuse. A lot of Hindu gurus and swamis and preachers have modulated Hinduism into a language of Christianity to make it more presentable, and in the process of compromising. For example, I was having a discussion with a guy yesterday who's talking to Hindus, and he's a Hindu preacher, and he's explaining the soul. So I said, but the self is the Atma, and the soul, he said, what's the difference? So I said, well, soul is not in animals and plants, Atman is. Soul doesn't reincarnate, Atman does. So he hadn't thought of it that way. It was just trendy and fashionable to become Americanized and become mainstream by picking up jargon, which he didn't fully appreciate what was happening by just using this jargon. And maybe he understood the difference, so he had kind of reinvented soul for himself. But that's not necessarily how the audience is going to take it. So one of the ways that difference can be preserved is through certain Sanskrit words like Atman, like Brahman, like moksha nirvana, as opposed to salvation. Because salvation has a different metaphysics behind it. Salvation is from a condition of sin. So moksha is from a condition of limited perception, limited cognition, ignorance. So when you innocently give up some Sanskrit words which are non-translatable actually, and you translate them into something that is trendy and will make you more popular as a guru, and you'll have more Westerners coming to you, you're actually doing a disservice to the Dharma, and you're also misleading, in a sense, the Westerners into thinking that it's the same thing, or they're imagining that they're being invited into a movement which has a lot of similarities as their own tradition, when in fact, at some point in time, they'll be facing some hard choices.
So it's maintaining authenticity through language.
Yes, and I speak English, and I write in English. I think it's a wonderful language. So my goal is to bring about 50 to 100 Sanskrit words and make them part of the English language. So that we can speak in English, but use those words. Like the word yoga is already there.
Yeah.
So yoga, luckily, did not get translated as gymnastics or exercise or prayer. None of those things would capture yoga. So yoga, the reason there is such a passion for yoga is that the word is there, which compels people to look deeper and understand what it means. So if you take an item and preserve, and which has a lot of depth of context in it, and you preserve the original word which contains all of those meanings, all the nuances in it, then in the beginning people may not understand all those contexts, but gradually they'll begin to unravel. So introducing a word of that kind is like planting a seed which will sprout. So I think that one of my techniques is to introduce back into the mainstream vernacular, both among Indian Americans and Hindus, and also among Westerners who are from the Abrahamic traditions, certain Sanskrit words, and explain how they're different and why using these words is important in order to capture the essence of that country.
One of the things that I find interesting, kind of in parallel process a little bit with the Jewish community, is my observation of the words that became mainstream in English. And they're not the sacred words used in prayer. You think of the word schlep. I schlepped my backpack. You think of the word schmutz. There's schmutz all over my house.
And we have many kinds of, pandits is a Sanskrit word, which is a very trained person who performs certain procedures. But now there's Wall Street pundits, there's pundits on, foreign policy. So sometimes when a word is introduced into the English language, it is given a different meaning. It is re-Christianed into another kind of meaning. And that's not serving the purpose I have in mind. I would give the example of yoga as a better example than the example of pandit, and even guru has become a very loose sort of thing. There's all kinds of gurus, There's a software guru, there's some gurus of any expertise. So I think you're right, that you could actually make a mockery of the word by introducing it in a way that is not authentic. So my hope is that that's not the way we introduce this word. So I'm writing a lot about each and every one of those very distinct categories of thought that Sanskrit contains, as is a huge context that people should understand.
Oh, very interesting.
So for instance, the latest piece I'm writing, which I have to decide where to go, is there's a common misconception that the idea of Kundalini, chakras, is the same as Holy Spirit. So I've written a blog, 3 pages, which I'll give you a copy of, on why Shakti and Kundalini are not the same as Holy Spirit.
Interesting. So clarifying the term and explaining what it means.
Yeah, and I start out by saying that difference doesn't mean superior or inferior. It just means we respect difference. And the cosmos is built on the principle of difference. Because Brahman takes all these forms as Leela, as the divine play. So to collapse all the diversity and say, well, we need only one kind of tree or one kind of fruit or one kind of culture or one kind of flower is an injustice. It's not a right thing for us to do. So preserving this diversity and learning to enjoy it is righteous. And this diversity, which is built into the nature of you look at anything, you look at a little teeny piece of grass with a microscope, you'll see so many little creatures moving around, and then you look at one creature, you look inside it, it's got cells, and each cell is different. I mean, this diversity has got, you can keep tunneling into the diversity with greater and greater resolution. and you find it's bigger and it gets bigger and bigger. So that is so central to the fabric of reality, the principle of diversity, because Brahman expresses and manifests as the entire cosmos in every tiniest, minutest way that is Brahman's form. So no two are identical. Every one is a distinct thing. And this way the diversity is inherent in the universe, and sacredness is inherent in the universe at every level. So to preserve the cultural diversity, after all, the cultures are different because they came from different parts of the world, and different parts of the world have different geographies. So if you're an Eskimo, you have a certain kind of evolution of culture. Then if you come from a desert, you come from a tree, forested culture, or if you're a mountain person, climate is different, the skin looks different, the body type looks different. If you're from a fishing community near the coast, you eat different stuff. So you could say that the differences in body types and cultures has a lot to do with difference in geography. But that is part of creation. It has been made like that. It's not a problem that we're supposed to solve. We're not supposed to have one ideal climate and enforce it everywhere and say there's one type of vegetation and one type of geographical rain pattern, and we ought to just optimize that, discover that perfect one and make it standard for everybody in the world. We'll destroy the planet if we do that. So that's why people are against genetically modified stuff and have, which gets rid of biodiversity. Because you find one kind of corn, and that's it. Or you clone a person and you say this is the ideal human being, and then you clone that person and make everybody like that. You've killed diversity. So I'm applying the same principle to cultures.
But do you think it extends far beyond Hinduism? Do you think that somebody who's Christian, someone who's Muslim, someone who's Jewish should similarly accept that principle, or do you think that there are barriers to that make it uniquely Hindu?
Very good. There's a principle I have called history centrism. History centrism is the reason for this blockage. History centrism says that because there is an infinite gap between the creator and the created, creator is external, aloof, and created us. Therefore, I don't have the innate capacity to know creators, to have the consciousness of the creator. Only the idea that says Brahman as Rajiv gives Rajiv the capacity to discover Brahman, because ultimately actually he is. So, but a tradition where creation is ex nihilo and God is separate from the world, the only way God can be known by man is through prophets, because that's the purpose of it.
Sort of an intermediary.
Intermediary is top down. So God chooses the prophet and says, give him this message. And then if they didn't get it, he sends another one. And then he sends another one. And then he may incarnate himself as the son and say, this is, I'll do the job directly. So the prophet lineages are what I'm calling history-centric, history-centrism, because there's a dependence on history. So it means that Joshua and Rajiv, if we are using that methodology, the methodology of seeing God as an infinite other, and we have to get to know him, then the only methodology applicable to us is to go through the historical revelations made through the prophets. And since these prophets are dead, gone, their history is recorded in churches and synagogues and mosques, they're historical societies in a sense. They are historical societies. The Western religions, the Abrahamic religions, are in fact historical societies. And so they are preserving history of events. And these histories are my only recourse to the truth, because I don't have direct access. There is no website I could go www.god.com and find out. So, because the revelation given to Jesus or to Moses or to Muhammad or the different prophets are once upon a time, and they've happened. And they're not happening to me, they're not available anymore. So I'm basically in bondage to a certain historical account, a historical record, which certain human beings claim to have and transmit to. So this means that each of the Abrahamic religions is basically defined by a certain account of history, which is its articles of incorporation, if you will. So that's the Constitution. That is the Constitution. Now, where they differ in trivial matters, they can reconcile. But where they differ in such a serious way that the truth of one will falsify the other, they're going to have war. Because the truth of one requires falsifying the other. So you see, for example, Christianity requires, the Christian thesis requires that Jesus is not just another prophet, but the Son of God. Because what he's done could only happen if God himself comes to save redemption for all of humanity. It would not be possible with just another regular prophet. It would have to be Son of God. So if you tell Christians that we are willing to accept Jesus as a wise man and a great yogi and good prophet, but not a Son of God, that's offensive, because that undermines Christianity's basic thesis. So, on the other hand, to a Muslim, a Son of God would not be possible to supersede with a regular prophet. A regular prophet would not be able to supersede Son of God claims. So, to have legitimacy on their side, they can say we respect Jesus as one of the greatest prophets, but we don't accept him as Son of God. So this is an example.
So rejecting specific claims that each has made.
And those claims are central to that other belief structure. So if you look at the Islamic Jewish fight over the dome, where there's a sacred dome, where there's a rival claim. That is a particular, according to the Jewish tradition, something that the kingdom of Israel has to be restored. And there's some very sacred event that happened there which has to be restored to with the Temple of David or something like that, right? Am I right? Yeah. Whereas in the history centrism of the Islamic narrative, that is from where Prophet Muhammad went to heaven. Now, if one history is valid, if you take sides with either one history, then it compels you to take action which is totally devastating to the other side. So it's a clash of histories. The modern clash that the world is facing is a clash of competing and mutually contradicting histories. This is the result of a history-centric pattern of knowing the truth. And the dharmic alternative is that history of Rajiv and father and ancestor and bloodline is irrelevant. I don't care what those guys did. My ancestors may be horrible guys, but what does it have to do with me? I am Brahman as Rajiv, and I'm going to awaken that consciousness, and I'm going to live by that. And therefore, whatever my biological ancestors may have done to your biological ancestors is actually irrelevant to us.
I'd like to push back.
Okay.
So this is coming from definitely a Jewish standpoint.
Sure.
And the first premise that I disagree with, but maybe is not nearly as exciting for conversation, is that I think that Jews and a lot of other Abrahamic adherents to other Abrahamic traditions do think they can directly communicate with God.
Okay.
They think that prophets had sort of a special or broader or deeper relationship. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that many would buy into the exclusivity of that type of communication. But the area that I find both most interesting and most challenging is that I feel like, in a sense, you're challenging then all three Abrahamic traditions, which you say are sort of historically centered, almost historically tied down,
right,
by saying that history is the wrong question, or history is irrelevant.
Yes.
Do you think that the Abrahamic traditions are willing to let go of history, or do you think that your claim will merely be another strand of the disagreement that you already see existing between the other traditions?
This is a very important question you raised. I'm glad you raised this question, because this is what I've been dealing with for many years of my life now. So first of all, I want to address both your points. The first point, that in the Abrahamic religions they do have mystical experiences and they do have prophetic experiences, is true, but not enough to topple the institutionalized account of history. So while there are mystics in Christianity, the lineage that prevailed in power is the history-centric lineage of the church. And that's why they had to get rid of these mystics as troublemakers and persecute some of them.
Because it was going against the central account.
Yes, yes. So history-centrism is a certain power structure which says you, the individual, are not able to do it on your own. Maybe it's theoretically possible, it's very dangerous, you may end up satanic or doing something wrong, so you better not try it. I, the keeper of the history, have the access to the keys for you. So you therefore come to me, and that gives them power and control over people. So not that the Western traditions didn't have rishis and gurus and yogic exemplars who had all these great consciousness experiences. They were there, but they were undermined by very powerful institutions. So somehow the institutionalized religion ran antithetical and still runs antithetical to the true mysticism and the true spiritual traditions that every human being, every community has. So I think it is not that something is different about the Abrahamic religion or about the Western people, but the Abrahamic religions becoming overly institutionalized had a tendency to suppress and repress these tendencies that exist in the Dharma tradition, which also existed then. So that's my sense of it. So one of the things I mentioned in this Holy Spirit article to differentiate it from Shakti is that there are books written on how people who have this Kundalini type experience in the West are considered psychiatric patients. And some are considered, that's a scientific explanation, and a friend of mine who's a...
Disembodiment or something like that.
There's something called Qigong syndrome in the psychiatric book of syndromes. There's something called Qigong syndrome, which is Kundalini type experience, and they are describing that this can happen, and that's called a syndrome. So it's a psychiatric condition, and you could be put away for, into an asylum for claiming that you have this experience, which to a Hindu is enlightenment. His Kundalini is rising, and he's going through this shaking, moving, all that stuff. And that's maybe where the Quakers and Shakers got their name from, because maybe they're having these kind of experiences. The biblical explanation, not the medical one, but the biblical explanation has often been that this is satanic, or that you have some evil spirits there.
The person is possessed. There's some external force that has robbed the person of their essence.
Correct. So the point I'm making is that the idea of self-realization and self-enlightenment and this very do-it-yourself spirituality that Hinduism and Buddhism have, less dependence or non-dependence on the institutional authority, this is because of a lack of dependence on historicity. If history were important for my salvation, then I would go to a reliable history society. I would, because I don't remember. I wasn't present 2,000 years ago. So I'd have to go to a church. I'd have to go to somebody who I trust for their account of history. I would become dependent on them. And being dependent on them for getting me out of my predicament using an idea of history which they claim to have, and that, that would lead me into on the Abrahamic religions. Whereas if I'm into the Dharma tradition, I'm looking for a spiritual master who has had a living experience of expanded consciousness, who can teach me to have the same. So in other words, for a Hindu, Jesus is someone we can accept as a living enlightened being who had all these experiences. The only difference is we would say that we all have that potential in us to become Jesus. That's the difference.
So it's, in a certain way, more universal in the way that you see it.
Yes, everyone can have that. And Prophet Muhammad had great revelations, because even though in that particular life he wasn't very learned, and he wasn't a scholar, and he hadn't done great yoga, but because of reincarnation, he may have been the reincarnation of a great master, of a great yogi. And so, unknown to him, he had these prior conditionings and prior tendencies drawn into him. And so he had these huge expansive revelations. And we have no problem accepting and respecting that, except we cannot say it's final and it's the only one. We have to say that I could have that too. And so, there is this Ahmadiyya sect of Muslims. Now, they claim that an Indian was another prophet. That it's a Muslim sect, Shiite, and they are persecuted in Islam. In Sunni and Shiite Islam, Ahmadiyyas are banned from being called Muslims. So if you are an Ahmadiyya, you cannot say I'm a Muslim as an Ahmadiyya, because you are actually an apostate. You are kind of violating the thing. And the reason you are violating and committing blasphemy is that you are denying the claim that Muhammad was the final prophet by postulating a new prophet. So this is history-centrism problem.
So it's very interesting for me to hear the challenge that you know, my Abrahamic tradition is too focused on history, it becomes exclusivist because of its historical claims. What I would say of the Dharmic traditions is there might be, conceivably, an understatement of the historical elements that brought about their existence. Mm-hmm. That a lot of the Dharmic traditions came about in specific historical periods due to specific sociological and historical circumstances that may be understated in a way that they shouldn't be, that there's a missing element of historicity in the way that you're portraying them.
Sure.
That maybe could enrich the practice if
sure.
added back in.
Sure. Absolutely correct. Most lineages in the Dharmic traditions have a historicity within the lineage. So like the Dalai Lama is a 14th reincarnation of, it's not biologically transmitted, but reincarnation. So there's a bit of a difference there. But nevertheless, it's a historical trend. They know the history of all the 14. So, and you find that many Hindu sects have a similar thing, that before that there was a founder of a certain tradition, and there's a whole historicity of that. The difference between this historicity and the Abrahamic historicity is the exclusivity claim. None of these traditions says that this particular incarnation of God, which starts my lineage, is the only one and the exclusive one. And none of them says that if I go to another part of the world, in Africa or Native Americans, and they've had a spiritual experience of God, my job is to crush them and to finish them off because they're somehow doing something wrong. That's their experience. I leave it alone. I respect them. And I share with them my experience and my ideas, and listen to their ideas, and we may disagree, but we can do it with respect. We can have difference with respect. So the difference, what I call difference anxiety. Difference anxiety is the anxiety that somebody is different from me. It could be gender difference, could be difference of race, could be difference of religion, could be whatever. That difference anxiety is a cause for the West wanting to get rid of difference because there's an anxiety over it. So the preferred way to get rid of difference is that I'm right, you're wrong, you become like me. And I can do it violently, or I can do it lovingly by converting you. But either way, I get rid of difference. Because it's
is homogeneity ultimately.
Homogeneity. Whereas the principle of Hinduism is that there's an idea called Swadharma. Swa means mine. So it's just like you have my documents and my websites, which are very personal, So the Swadharma is my dharma. It is literally my dharma. So there is a Joshua Swadharma, which is your dharma. So your Swadharma. And there's a Rajiv Swadharma, which is my Swadharma. So the idea that this is my dharma, my purpose in this world, my role, so this is Brahman as Rajiv, has got a very distinct purpose and role. The same director makes many scripts and many roles for all the different characters to be played. So when the director hires you and says you got to be Joshua as X, he gives you a certain personality and a role, and when he says you got to be Joshua as Y, it's a different one. So when I'm doing my Swadharma, I'm being true to my calling. And I want you to do your Swadharma as Brahman, as Joshua. Born in a certain community, born with a certain tradition, born with certain ideas from prophets, certain books. I want you to do that, because then you are enriching the whole cosmos by playing your role, as I am playing my role. So I have no desire to condemn it, or to convert you, or to tell you you're going to go to hell, or any of that stuff. So this is the difference. The difference is having difference with respect versus difference anxiety. And difference anxiety results in exclusivity. So the historicity that may exist in both cases, in one case it is non-exclusive because I have no anxiety over the fact that somebody's got a whole different history. God came and did all these things and said all these things. Probably did. I have no evidence on the contrary. And I have not been compelled to go prove him wrong and convert him, or invade them and take over the world. I have no such mandate. And I just resist them trying to do that to me. That's all I resist. But Hindus have never gone out to, when the country was very wealthy, very materially prosperous, which is how it was, and all the records indicate that, it was a very prosperous country. It didn't have an ambition to go out expanding, because the idea was that everybody is who they are, and we are how we are. So the live and let live, celebrate the diversity of people, is very deeply deeply built into the cosmology and the metaphysics.
I'd like to ask a tough question.
Yeah, please do.
So Ibu Patel always talks about how it's just so easy in the context of dialogue about other people's religions to compare your best to the other tradition's worst. And I worry that my question might fall victim to that critique, but I also feel as though much can be learned from asking about the tough things in everybody's tradition.
Yes.
When I look at contemporary India today, where the vast majority of Hindus in the world live, first of all, I see a country that's booming and prospering and doing phenomenally, but there are still significant religious tensions that exist there. How do you account for their presence? What do you think caused them? Do you think it's a perversion of religion? Do you think it's leftover from colonialism?
Very good question. And I write a lot on this also, so I'll share with you my ideas. Yeah, I as a dharmic person find the current socio-political condition in India to be unsatisfactory. And I do not consider this to be a sort of, nor do I consider the trend of materialism and imitating the West to be dharmic necessarily. Dharma is not go back in time either. It is not that you run away and live in some cave and don't have medical progress and technological progress. All that is fine. Progressiveness, science, and inquiry is all fine. But what I find troubling is there is a tendency to just mimic the Western culture because it will get you jobs, it will get you into famous journals you can write better, you will get probably a book deal with a great publisher, you get on television easier, so you can become more successful by abandoning or making private your faith and becoming more sort of secularized. Because the West has controlled the definition of what is secular. And the dharmic equivalent would be pluralism, not negating the faith but having lots of faiths. That would be the dharmic equivalent. So there is a dharmic term for that, which I also write about, which is a dharmic response to secularism. But India didn't follow that path. India likes to call itself a secular democracy rather than a pluralistic democracy, which would have been better in my view. What happened to India is that there was Gandhi, who wanted India to go back to Dharma. He used Sanskrit non-translatables in his life. He lived differently. His life, his dress, language, style was different. He was very audacious. And he said, I respect the English, but they shouldn't impose on us. And by the same token, I don't impose and want the English to become like us either. So we are how we are and we should respect each other. But I hold my ground firmly. Now he wanted a return to Indian society after independence that would be dharmic, villages would be empowered, it would not be top heavy, not be top down, centrally governed, because Indian society was very decentralized and local villages having their own governance and their own bottom-up kind of society. And bottom-up goes very well with this idea of dharma where each individual has his own dharma. So a few people who get together who have had similar experiences might form a sangha. But it is not some church headquarters bringing it down on us. It is
or centralized government.
Or centralized government. So it is neither centralized religion nor centralized government, but very decentralized. Gandhi had this idea. Now, Nehru, who prevailed, was trained in Oxford, a very Eurocentric kind of person. In John Kenneth Galbraith's writings, he was the former ambassador to India and a great Harvard economist. He knew Nehru very well in the 60s. In one of his writings, he says that Nehru considered himself to be the last Englishman to rule India. They were so proud of being English. He had this great complex of India. So the system of governance became secular democracy rather than pluralistic. It became high industry imported from the Soviet Union. A lot of these central 5-year plans. He wanted India in a few decades to kind of have this European-style industrial revolution. But builds on not entrepreneurship. Indians are very good entrepreneurs, extremely good entrepreneurs, because that's something bottom-up. That's something decentralized. People self-organize little groups and they become big groups. And Indians are very difficult to manage. I used to be in the corporate world. It's very difficult to manage and control in large numbers. Westerners are much more compliant. Westerners will fall in place. If you can order them, you can organize them, and Indians will all do their own thing. Everybody will do their own thing and become ultra-creative and almost anarchical. But that's the character of that sort of a society. So India lost its soul, if you will, in the Nehru versus Gandhi fight over India's soul, Nehru won. And Gandhi was very old, he died. So it's a Nehruvian idea of India that started building the foundation of India. So what has happened specifically in India is that religious conflict, now you talk about violence and conflict. The violence and conflict in India has got multiple causes, and this the media doesn't analyze properly. They like to blame somebody because it's easy to do. But the many causes are the parliamentary system of representation, rather than a presidential election system where you directly elect the president. The parliamentary system has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that even a little group can have 1 or 2 parliamentary members. You know, if you are 2% of the vote, you might get 2 or 3 members in there. So for example, in this country, if somebody were, if there were a parliamentary system, then, some team in the group may get one congressman of theirs.
And the whole country elects then a certain
percentage. All the people who are elected, then all the equivalent of senators and congressmen, then they elect the president. So this gives you diversity of representation. However, the problem of this has been that the exploitation of this in this age of materialism and corruption. Corruption is the real cause of India's problem. Corruption, greed, corruption. It has become profitable to become an elected official. Because if you get elected, for that you need to convince some ethnic group or some religious group or some identity that they are a victim. If they elect you, you will have to have a voice. So the victimhood gets you elected. The marketing the victimhood of some people.
Incentivizing victimhood.
Yes, incentivizing victimhood. So when the person gets elected, then he bargains. The bigger the group, the more he has voting power. So if he has a group of 20 members of parliament, then he has a lot of power. If he has only 2, he doesn't have a lot of power. So if he belongs to a block of people, they can then, in order to form the central government, they have some chips they're playing. So they want to be given a position in the cabinet where they can make billions of dollars. It's really a corruption-driven system. And now in the last 6 months, a huge hue and cry in India over fighting against corruption. The Swiss banks, when they disclosed all these secret accounts to the US, gave away the fact that the largest amount of money in secret Swiss accounts that are held, the largest country is India. About $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. The total foreign exchange reserve of India is 300 billion or 400 billion. So 3 or 4 times the national reserve is the value of Swiss accounts of Indians, which is corrupt money. Now, this is because the money they get in bribes and deals, they like to have it parked somewhere else, so it can't be found. So the politicians are in it, the business people are in it, the media people are in it, some religious people are in it. So basically you have a very corrupt society. This is a result of greed and materialism gone haywire, not a dharmic way of life. And so when people are in a rush to catch up with somebody, they get into these kind of things. This is the problem I think that's happening. And as long as there's corruption, there is incentives to create little fiefdoms, make them fight, make them clash. So if I want to go to a community and start some fight, then what will happen is one side will be on my side, one of those people, the other people will be hating me, I polarize them, and this way I may get enough votes to get something.
So everybody wins, unfortunately,
short term
when there's tension.
Short term. Except the people who are getting killed.
Obviously, yeah.
They're pawns, they're being used. So I think to understand the origins of religious violence in India, you have to understand secular democracy, which doesn't respect pluralism, which respects absence of religiosity and religious identity, creates a vacuum of religious identity and religious leadership. And so irresponsible forces come and take over. And combined with rampant materialism and a rush to westernize creates corruption. And when you mix these up, you have a society where the term vote bank in India is a term politically used. Vote bank means you as a politician have a group of people that are your vote bank. So you can go and play that vote bank when you're sitting and negotiating with somebody. You can say such and such group of people in such and such numbers living in these places are my vote bank. And if you have a larger vote bank than I have, then I have to consider you being more powerful guy. So vote banking equates with fragmentation, equates with clash after you fragment, because the most intense fragment is the one that's fighting. Then you really intensify it. So these are some of the problems that India is facing, and I do not have necessarily a positive prognosis for India. I don't have that. And also in my assessment of Dharma as a world view, I keep that assessment separate from my assessment of India as a group of people.
So there are so many elements going into India as we see it today,
yes,
that it's not necessarily a living manifestation
of
those values.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. And therefore, the idea, and we are back circle to the original point, that because of this idea of reincarnation and karma, I don't think that this idea, the principles of Dharma belong in a geographically contained place. And these are principles that Americans will discover. More and more Americans are getting into yoga. More and more of them are having the Kundalini experience and not allowing someone to say it's satanic or you have to go to a psychiatric hospital. Many people since the 60s, and I'm writing books on this, have had these kinds of experiences through the Dharmic system. They've had gurus, they've had all kinds of Buddhist, Hindu experiences. And while the issues of history centrism have not been addressed adequately, the experiences can go only so far. And when they bump into the history-centric identity that the guy is having, he has an inner clash. And either he has to give up the history-centrism and go for this, or he has to let the history-centrism prevail and take control of him and reject all that he's learned, or maybe appropriate it and bring it into his historical context.
Sounds like you're almost suggesting a dharmic framework for dialogue, wherein there's sort of, more or less it's for a Westerner, the analog you had mentioned was pluralism, but with a different set of orientations, different set of principles going in that you think maybe can provide a great basis,
yes,
and maybe a more constructive basis,
yes,
for dialogue.
We have a term, a Sanskrit term, one of my non-translatable that I'm bringing out, is called Purva Paksha. It's a hyphenated word. Purva is P-U-R-V-A, hyphen Paksha is P-A-K-S-H-A. Now this means one's view of the other. So it was pioneered by Hindus and Buddhists having Purva Paksha of each other. And different schools of Hinduism and different schools of Buddhism and Jainism and the atheists and all kinds of different people, they would be having Purva Paksha. That is the old world, ancient equivalent of interfaith dialogue. Very differently done than today's interfaith dialogue. And the starting premise is that I must truly understand the other's position, step into his shoes and feel like he's feeling, and really understand where he's coming from. And then I should step into my shoes and explain to him how I'm feeling. So he'll tell me how he feels about me, and I'll tell him how I feel about him. And we will talk about difference without being afraid, because deep down we trust each other. Yeah. And so we don't have to hide that difference, we don't have to pretend it's not there. We, in this body and in this particular birth, are in a certain form. And in the previous birth we may have been in different cultures also. So here I am a Hindu, and this person is a Jewish person, this person is Muslim, or whatever, and so we're having this conversation, and no one's being blamed, no one's wrong or right, but I'm explaining how I've been told things, and I'm learning how they've been told things, and I'm explaining my experiences when I try certain ritual practices, and I want to learn from them. So this kind of a Purva Paksha can start. It will be very different from the interfaith process today, because today's interfaith process wants to claim that there's no difference, that we're all the same. And I find that when I go to interfaith events, they suffer from difference anxiety. Most of these guys.
They don't know how to engage with the difference. In a way.
Yeah, they're uncomfortable with the difference, and so they want to pretend, they want to take the 10% very superficial stuff, which is same, or 50% whatever, and keep talking on that, and without coming out with what is really different in our views and our positions, they cannot make too much progress. That's why interfaith dialogue has become a very big thing, but hasn't really made any huge breakthroughs.
So this is a way of effectively mediating and discussing those differences.
Yes. I also have another proposal. Like in the schools there is something called Model UN. Mm-hmm. I would like a Model United Religions organization, where each religion is represented by a team. So a student joins a team for a particular religion, which need not be their own religion. but they're learning how to represent them.
So they can empathize fully. They have to represent them publicly, and therefore the level of knowledge has to be very deep.
My daughter in school, they had the model UN, so each one had to be in a team of a country. So she was on the Tibet team. So she had to correspond with Tibetans, read stuff, and go to their meetings and really understand the Tibetan position on some issues. And so there were other debates with Palestinians and Israelis and Americans and so on. So their views had to be represented. So a person on the Palestinian team didn't have to be ethnically from Palestine. It could be, they would be allocated. If you had something of that sort where every religion is a member, United Nations only nations are members, countries are members, political entities are members. Well, what if you had something where the membership unit is a religious entity? And you don't even have to have one seat for Hinduism. You could have one seat for the ISKCON people and one seat for the Ramakrishna people. Many. Similarly,
so you could subdivide it.
You could have Mormons as a group, and you could have Presbyterians as a group, and you could have the Catholic Church, and you could have, there's many kinds of people. And similarly, with Islam, you could have the Ahmadiyyas present, and you could have the Shiites and many kinds of schools of Sunnism present. So, if you had this model UN approach, and you applied this method of Purva Paksha of debate and discussion, of difference, I think something extraordinary would come. And this is a very new model. It's a new idea, and I wish I could get people from various faiths committed to trying this model. And then we could go and get some funding or get some support and start this. And this way, the important issues of religious diversity, important issues, whether it's about, prayer in schools or divorce or abortion or gays or whatever the issues are, or it could be religious conflicts in various places. These could be discussed and debated much better by such a group than in the United Nations, where they are not trained in religion. The representatives are really not trained in religion. It's sort of secondary. They wish it would go away. They have a huge difference anxiety with respect to religion in general. Secular people have anxiety about when you start talking religion. So they don't realize it as a force that exists. You have to accept it and deal with it and understand it. It can be a very positive force. It should be. So my model, my vision is that I'd like to, through these writings about difference and different anxieties and the Purva Paksha method of debate and discussion, I'd like to evolve towards creating a model UN approach to religions that could then become part of school programs. And there could be a school version, there could be a version for grown-up people, lay people, experts. They could have different kinds of settings in which these discussions happen.
You seem to be very invested in young people. Just based on our earlier conversation, one thought is that, in a sense, their karma has yet to be determined for their lifetimes. They have more ahead of them, and therefore more can be changed.
Yes.
Does that play a role in your interest in them?
Yes. I think that they are our future. And if I can leave as a legacy just some ideas, some possibilities, some resources, so that the next generation that get trained with all this can have a better chance of making some progress, that would be really remarkable. That's what I like to do. And I feel that the older generation of people, most of them, my generation of people, it's very difficult to sit down and have an open conversation. Because they've got their minds made up, and they're too invested in this. They're not free thinkers. Like for instance, I'll tell you most of my Indian American friends, the kind that live in prosperous neighborhoods, Princeton areas and East Coast, they're all doing very well. They don't understand why I'm doing all this. I could be doing deals, making millions of dollars. I could be investing in something. For them, my having spent 16 years, 17 years of my life full time doing this is something they don't understand. They don't know why someone would do that when he had other options. And I start arguing because I think at that stage in life they are quite established, they're not likely to change, they are pursuing their ideas of living, which tend to be material accumulation, just getting ahead in different ways. And I have more fun when I visit their homes. I have more fun talking to kids. And I sit down and ask the young people around, what they're doing and so on. And I have more excitement dealing with them.
Is the Dharma of a child different than the Dharma of an adult? Or are they just trying to self-actualize and realize the Dharma of the adult?
Yeah, I think the Dharma is the person, Dharma is evolving during their life, and it evolves in a direction based on their choices. And so, unfortunately, sometimes parents push the child too much into a certain direction, like as if my Dharma has to become your Dharma, that kind of an ego thing. I try not to do that with my kids. I try to very explicitly, over and over again, let them make their choices, choose their careers, do whatever is their calling, experiment openly, feel safe in trying things, change their mind. And so I never try to take my unfulfilled wishes and dump them on the kids and say, okay, now you got to carry out. And a lot of Indian parents are pressuring their kids to go into medicine or go into law or go into industry or Wall Street or technology, because there's some careers where you can do better, make more money. So they're applying their criteria of happiness and success onto the kids. And maybe the kid wants to become a musician, or maybe the kid wants to become an artist or become a great chef or whatever. And they're not allowing, or certainly not encouraging them to express that for themselves.
So the children inherit the Dharma of their parents, rather than letting their own manifest itself.
Yes, the children have their own Dharma, but it gets overridden, overruled by the parents imposing too much. Even in religion, I have encouraged my kids to sort of decide for themselves, learn about different traditions, and have their own ideas about spirituality.